My name is Linda Miller, and I'm 30 years old. If you'd walked into the restaurant that night, you'd have said the light was flattering. Edison bulbs, brick walls, everyone dressed in dark neutrals that made the wine look richer than it was. It was the kind of place that liked the sound of its own mirrors. Vance picked it because the chef's on a list. I went because I used to love the way his face softened when he thought he'd chosen well for us. He set his chopsticks down like a judge setting down a gavel. Linda, he said, gentle the way a dentist is gentle, we need to talk. My stomach didn't fall. It rose, like an elevator that missed my floor. Okay, I said. You're comfortable. He searched my face as if I'd help him finish the sentence. You're not ambitious enough. My friends, well, it's not just them. I can't keep pretending we're equals. There it was. Not rage. Something worse. Recognition. I'd been waiting for this conversation without knowing it, ever since his new circles started measuring goals in followers and rooms, in the way people turned to look. I looked at the California roll he'd insisted we order, the sake he liked to pronounce for the server, the branded handbag slouched in the chair beside him like a small, smug animal. I tried to keep my voice level. Your friends, I repeated. They're right, he said, a little too quickly. You're sweet, but you're not going anywhere. I've seen stress diagrams fracture along the thinnest lines. This felt like that. Nothing dramatic, just the quiet sound of a load redistributing. I took out my wallet, slid enough cash onto the table to cover my half. The bill sat there like a neat little exit sign. Good luck, I said, finding what you're looking for. The rain started as I walked to my car, soft at first, then earnest. I sat there with my hands on the wheel for 20 minutes, listening to it thicken. The city blurred until the restaurant became a suggestion. Somewhere behind me, laughter scraped the sky. I didn't cry. I drove home in a tunnel of wipers and headlights, and when I reached my apartment, I stared at the vaulted silence like it might start talking if I waited politely enough. At 2:07 a.m., the quiet started to itch. I opened my laptop and typed without thinking, the way you press on a bruise to remind it who's in charge. Title: Dumped for being too normal. I wrote about the dinner, about how we met at a mutual friend's wedding, how he used to love that I was steady, how his orbit shifted to people who performed success for a living. Brett and the brunch crowd, the ones who could turn sunlight into content and content into invitations. How I started holding his phone for the group shots, then started holding my breath. I ended with a line that made me wince even as I typed it. Maybe I'm just not loud enough to sound like success. I hit submit and shut the laptop like it could bite. I wasn't asking for advice. I just wanted the words out of my house. By morning, the post had hundreds of comments. By noon, it was on the front page. By evening, my inbox was a second weather system. Strangers told me they'd been me. They told me I wasn't crazy for wanting a life that didn't need an audience. They said, you deserve better, like a choir that had never met but somehow knew the harmony. I told no one at work. Not my project lead, who thinks in decimal points. Not my cube neighbor who waters the office pothos like a sacrament. Certainly not Caleb, the journalist I hadn't met yet and would later learn the shape of. My company builds things that don't scream for attention, structures that hold because the math is true. It felt like betrayal to bring the internet's noise into that room. Still, the noise found me. A podcast producer from Breaking Through sent a message. Your post moved me. Would you talk? I hovered over the decline button. Talking about a breakup on a podcast sounded like the exact performance Vance would have accused me of. But the producer's note wasn't hungry. It was curious. I said yes to a quick call. We talked for an hour. The episode didn't drop yet. Life slid back into its grooves. I biked to the office. I ran simulations. I came home to a garage that smelled like solder and late decisions. My modular drone chassis, an old obsession, waited on the folding table, elegant in its unfinishedness. Snap-on thermal imaging, payload modules you could swap mid-mission. Search and rescue that adapts to the disaster, not the other way around. It wasn't pretty enough for his friends' feeds. It didn't need to be. A week after the post, I saw Brett tag Vance at a yacht party. Night skyline, white sneakers, captions about the right rooms. My throat did the smallest, stupidest thing. Then I saw her, the woman at Vance's side, hair like a commercial, smile like a closing bell. Elena Ward. Brett called her a visionary investor in Pinnacle Innovations. I put my phone face down and tightened a bolt on the drone frame until the metal spoke back. 2 Mondays later, an email pinged my work inbox. Subject: Potential licensing opportunity. Pinnacle Innovations. The thread was long, the budget was bigger than anything I'd seen in my folder, the visibility significant. PR to be handled by, my eyes stuttered, Vance Brooks. The universe has a sense of humor. Ours hires a legal team. Due diligence is a boring miracle. It doesn't clap, it checks. Within 48 hours, legal flagged Pinnacle for phantom clients and counterfeit testimonials. The deal dissolved like sugar in hot tea. Then the heat kept rising. Trade blogs picked up the smoke. Vendors came forward. Former employees said the quiet parts. Elena Ward's empire looked less like a company and more like a costume. Someone forwarded the legal memo to everyone on the email chain. That included Vance. That night, I stood in the doorway of my garage and watched the rain drag light down the driveway. I thought of the restaurant's mirrors, the way they pretended to double the room, how you could mistake reflection for abundance if you needed to. My phone buzzed. A number I knew too well lit the screen, then went dark. I let it. On the workbench, the drone frame waited, patient as a promise. I picked up the next module and started to build. People think heartbreak fades like a bruise, that it lightens, then vanishes. It doesn't. It just changes color. Mine settled somewhere between steel and silence. Work became the structure I could still control. Concrete and equations never lied to you. I threw myself into design, calculations, structural simulations, quiet routines that didn't ask me to smile. The garage became my after-hours laboratory. Between soldering smoke and blue light, I built what no one else saw value in, a modular drone system for disaster response, a platform that could swap parts to fit the emergency, thermal cameras for search and rescue, payload units for supply drops. Practical, not flashy. Exactly the kind of thing Vance would have called not marketable enough. At first, that thought burned, then it fueled. One Thursday night, while running a prototype test, my phone buzzed. A voice message from Maya, the producer at Breaking Through. Linda, your episode goes live tomorrow morning. We're calling it Comfort Isn't Failure. You were brilliant. I'd almost forgotten I recorded that interview. The one about self-worth and ambition. The one I did because I wanted closure disguised as purpose. When the episode dropped, I thought maybe a few people would listen. By noon, my inbox was an avalanche. Thousands of messages. Listeners saying my story sounded like theirs. Messages from women in engineering who felt invisible. Men who said they were tired of being told they weren't enough. It felt surreal. Strangers resonating with my words while I sat cross-legged in a garage covered in dust and circuit wires. And then, the story escaped me. Clips from the podcast flooded social media. I became a headline. The engineer dumped for being too normal. It was absurd and validating at once. I didn't ask for the spotlight, but there it was, pointed directly at me. Meanwhile, Vance's life looked like a marketing campaign for irony. Screenshots and tags showed him thriving. Yacht parties, rooftop galas, a new power couple dynamic with Elena Ward, the same investor I'd seen in those tagged photos. They looked luminous, curated, expensive. I scrolled longer than I should have, the way you touch a sore tooth just to check if it still hurts. Then one morning, fate stopped scrolling and knocked directly. An internal email from business development landed in my inbox. Subject line, potential collaboration, Pinnacle Innovations. They wanted to license our drone tech for a high-profile marketing campaign about innovation in crisis response. The client? Pinnacle Innovations. PR coordination through Brooks & Cody Media. Vance's firm. For a second, I thought it was a prank, but it wasn't. Corporate due diligence is a quiet predator. Our legal team started digging. Background checks, financial statements, vendor references. It's a routine I'd read hundreds of times before, but this one felt personal. The deeper they went, the uglier it became. Fabricated investor names, fake testimonials, payment disputes buried under NDAs. It wasn't a company. It was a house of mirrors. The official memo landed 3 days later. Recommendation: terminate negotiations with Pinnacle Innovations. High reputational risk. The deal was dead by Friday. But the story didn't die with it. By the following Tuesday, 3 different news outlets had picked up the leak. Pinnacle Innovations accused of fraudulent practices. The so-called visionary investor, Elena Ward, vanished from social media. Her LinkedIn went under construction. The scandal spread like a chemical reaction. Fast, precise, unstoppable. And in the crossfire stood Vance. His PR firm had just signed a 6-month contract with Pinnacle. When the story broke, the executives needed a scapegoat. They found him. Failure to vet a client. Reputational negligence. He was suspended within a week. I didn't hear it from him. I heard it from someone else. Lena, a colleague who still kept tabs on the industry gossip. Guess karma moves faster than the algorithm, she said, half laughing. I didn't laugh. There was no triumph in watching someone implode, even someone who'd once dissected me like a resume. Just a kind of hollow exhaustion. The realization that he'd built everything to impress people who were now watching him fall apart. That night, I stood by my window, watching the city burn in pixels and glass. Somewhere out there, Vance was reading the same headlines I was. He'd wanted to be impressive. He'd succeeded, just not in the way he'd imagined. I went back to the garage, powered up the drone prototype, and thought about balance. About how the right design doesn't need applause, it just holds. Foreshadowing. The internet had given me sympathy once. It would soon give me something sharper. 6 months. That's how long it had been since the restaurant. Long enough for the air around his name to stop vibrating when people said it, or so I thought. Then his name showed up in my inbox. From Vance Brooks, subject empty. The first line read like an accusation wearing grief as disguise. You could have warned me, Linda. He claimed I'd known Pinnacle was a fraud and that I'd stayed silent just to watch him burn. He said the podcast interviews were revenge, that I'd milked our breakup for fame. 3 paragraphs of projection ending with a sentence that almost made me laugh. You wanted this. You wanted me ruined. I typed a reply, deleted it, typed again, and finally left one line standing. I stopped saving people who don't want to be saved. Send. For a day, I felt clean. Then his reply arrived. 5 paragraphs this time, laced with venom. He accused me of being mediocre with better PR, said my success was built on victimhood. The last line was almost poetic in its cruelty. You'll always be average, Linda. I blocked him. 3 days later, the internet unblocked him for me. Lena sent me a message with a link. Oh no, she wrote. The Reddit title was unmistakable. That engineer who got dumped? Her ex is lying. I clicked. It wasn't gossip, it was a dossier. Whoever posted it, anonymous but clearly thorough, had receipts, screenshots of Vance's emails, internal PR documents, proposals with inflated client metrics, side-by-side timelines showing how he'd pitched fake success stories to media outlets, doctored numbers, even fabricated testimonials from non-existent investors. Elena Ward wasn't his victim. She was his collaborator. The internet devoured the evidence like a meal it had been promised months ago. The post hit the front page within hours. Comment threads lit up with disbelief and dark humor. He left an engineer for a con artist? Poetic justice. Performance is expensive when you can't afford integrity. Imagine calling someone not ambitious enough while defrauding your own clients. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. The crowd didn't want me. They wanted catharsis. Within a week, Vance's PR license was suspended, and his firm terminated him for cause. Elena's company dissolved quietly before lawsuits could finish loading. Brett, his closest friend and social amplifier, unfollowed him across every platform. Their yacht photos vanished. So did the quotes about leveling up. One night, my phone buzzed again. It was that same colleague from before, the one who seemed to take moral pleasure in keeping me updated. He burned every bridge, he said. No one will touch him now. I thanked him, ended the call, and just sat in silence. You'd think vindication feels warm. It doesn't. It's cold, like the moment after lightning when you realize it missed you. I walked out to the garage, turned on the single hanging bulb, and looked at the drone resting on the work table. The frame gleamed under the light, alive and waiting. It reminded me of resilience, how sometimes what's built in silence outlasts what's built in spotlight. For the first time since the breakup, I realized I didn't care about him at all. I cared about what I was building, about the work that mattered, about living a life that didn't need an audience. That night, I wrote a note in my project journal. Purpose doesn't perform, it endures. And maybe that's the real revenge, because while the internet tore Vance apart, I went back to soldering. Each spark that hissed against metal felt like a small absolution, a reminder that I had survived performance, chosen patience, and somehow turned humiliation into momentum. A week later, an email arrived from a nonprofit called Operation Homeward. They'd heard my podcast episode and wanted to talk about partnering to develop drones for veteran rehabilitation programs and post-disaster mobility support. I stared at the message for a long time, not because it was big, but because it was real. No hashtags, no audience, just purpose. And in that moment, I understood something I'd been missing since the night of the restaurant. Sometimes, karma doesn't knock. It builds. A year since I left that restaurant with nothing but my dignity and an umbrella that wouldn't open. Now I wake up to the quiet hum of something new. Not fame, not redemption, structure. Miller Dynamics is no longer a sketch in a notebook. It's a company. Small, yes, but alive. 3 full-time engineers, a handful of contractors, and a mission that makes sense. Adaptive drone technology for disaster response and rehabilitation support. We partnered officially with Operation Homeward, the veteran nonprofit that had reached out months ago. They provide field expertise. We provide design. Together, we're building drones that deliver medical kits, monitor heat signatures, and integrate prosthetic support for mobility training. It isn't glamorous, but it's honest. The internet still remembers me as the engineer who got dumped for being too normal. But that label feels like it belongs to someone else, someone still looking for applause. These days, I prefer silence that means progress. It was around then that I met Caleb Nguyen. He was a journalist writing a feature about innovation in rehabilitation tech. He arrived at our office in jeans and a notebook that had lived a hard life. When I told him we didn't do product demos for press yet, he smiled and said, "That's fine. I'm here for the why, not the what." We talked for hours about the ethics of visibility, about the cost of ambition, about how the internet can love you in the morning and forget you by dinner. When the article came out, he called it The Quiet Architect. It wasn't about the breakup at all. It was about building things that last longer than their headlines. After that, we started seeing each other more often. Coffee first, then hikes, then late-night dinners on my balcony, where the conversation stretched past midnight. Caleb wasn't trying to fix me or brand me. He just listened, fully, attentively, without looking for the camera angle. He never asked about Vance, and I never offered. 3 months later, something strange landed in my inbox again. But this time, it wasn't chaos. An invitation. Subject: Tech Future Innovation Gala. Keynote speaker, confirmation. They wanted me, to headline this year's gala in Seattle. The event spotlighted groundbreaking work in technology and humanitarian applications. The chosen venue? Altara, a glass-roofed restaurant downtown. 1 block away from where Vance once told me I wasn't impressive enough. For a moment, I thought about saying no. Too symbolic, too neat. But then Caleb looked at me over coffee and said, maybe it's not symbolism, maybe it's symmetry. So I said yes. The weeks leading up to the event blurred into motion. Fittings, interviews, speech drafts, last-minute calls from sponsors. Every now and then, someone would mention how inspiring my journey had been, as though heartbreak were a marketing strategy. But I smiled politely, because I knew what they couldn't, that the real story wasn't revenge or rebound. It was resilience. Quiet, consistent, earned. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in silver air. Caleb helped zip up my black satin dress, simple and structured. Nothing flashy, but it felt like armor. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." We drove through the city lights to Altara. The skyline shimmered against the glass facade, and for a heartbeat, I caught my reflection. Steady, unrecognizable, free. Inside, the room buzzed with investors, engineers, journalists, all of them chasing the next big thing. But tonight, the thing was mine. When I stepped onto the stage, the lights were bright, but not blinding. I began with a line I'd once written in my project notes. Purpose doesn't perform, it endures. The speech flowed from there, about the false economy of appearances, about choosing meaning over momentum. I spoke about building quietly, about redefining what impressive really means. When it ended, the applause was long, warm, unhurried, not thunderous, honest. Afterward, I joined Caleb near the bar, laughing with board members from Operation Homeward, the tension melting into the glass clink of relief. That's when I saw him, across the room, near the window overlooking the skyline, a shape I hadn't thought about in months. Vance, alone. His hair shorter, his suit sharper, as if he was trying to wear the past back into shape. He held a champagne glass like it was a prop, and when he turned and saw me, I watched recognition settle on his face like dust in a museum, slow, heavy, inevitable. He started walking toward me. Caleb sensed it instantly. His hand brushed mine, grounding, protective. I inhaled. The past, apparently, had RSVP'd after all. He stopped a few feet away, rehearsed confidence wrapped in an expensive suit that couldn't hide the cracks underneath. The air between us buzzed, not with chemistry, but static. The sound you get when two frequencies that once aligned have drifted far apart. "Linda," he said softly, almost tender, "it's been a while." I smiled, the polite, professional kind. "It has." "You look different," he said. "Stronger." His eyes darted toward Caleb, who stood beside me, relaxed, hand resting lightly against the small of my back. "I saw your speech," Vance continued. "I'm happy for you. Really." It was the kind of compliment that begged for redemption. "Thank you," I said simply. He hesitated. "I was stupid, you know. You were the real thing. I just didn't see it then." Caleb shifted slightly. I could feel the weight of his quiet protectiveness. "I studied Vance, the man who once called me comfortable like it was an insult, the man who mistook steadiness for stagnation. And I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, not even nostalgia, just distance." "Sorry," I said after a moment, tilting my head as if searching for recognition. "Have we met?" For a second, I saw his face crumble, a flicker. Disbelief, then understanding, then the hollow kind of regret that arrives too late to matter. "Linda, please don't." But I didn't let him finish. I turned slightly toward Caleb, smiling as if we'd been mid-conversation before the interruption. "I think the coordinator wanted to introduce us to the veterans delegation," I said. Caleb caught the cue instantly. "Yeah," he replied, eyes steady on mine. "They're waiting near the terrace." "Enjoy your evening, Vance," I said, gentle but final. Then I walked away. I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard the faint clink of his untouched champagne glass against the bar. Later that night, as the crowd thinned, I saw him again, not up close, but from across the room. He was standing near the exit, shoulders slightly hunched, staring at something by the entrance. A sign. The event's sponsor board read, "This gala is proudly hosted by the Miller Foundation. Founder and director, Linda Miller." He stood there for a long time, motionless. Then he laughed, a short, broken sound that didn't reach his eyes, and walked out into the night. The automatic doors closed behind him with a soft sigh. I didn't watch him go. Later, in the hotel room, the city lights pooled across the sheets like quiet applause. Caleb was asleep beside me, breathing slow, steady, the kind of peace that doesn't demand an audience. I poured myself a cup of lukewarm coffee, opened in the window, and looked down at the street below. 1 year ago, Vance told me I wasn't impressive enough, that I wasn't going anywhere. Tonight, he stood in a room I built, a room I filled with purpose, not performance. He didn't recognize me because I'd outgrown the version of myself he left. That's the thing about people who measure worth by applause. They never notice the builders until the stage belongs to them. I closed the window and whispered the words that had carried me through every sleepless night, every quiet rebuild, every soldered frame in that garage. Karma doesn't need an audience, it just needs time. And for the first time, I believed it completely.